This single recovered audio file is the only remaining evidence of what happened to three men in the Oregon wilderness. Labeled Aaron_Oregon_camp.wave, it contains the final 48 hours of their trip. For the first several hours, the metadata reflects a standard camping trip. You can hear the crackle of a fire and the steady, low-frequency patterns of three people in conversation. The baseline changes here. This sharp vertical spike is a whistle. It's a frequency that doesn't match the wind or any known bird species in the region. The voices belong to the narrator, Aaron, and Luke. They had chosen an unmarked forestry road specifically because it was off the grid and rarely used by other hikers. To understand the nature of the disappearance, we have to look at the recording not as a story, but as a sequence of acoustic data points. 2 miles in, the men noted a total absence of environmental noise. No wind, no insects, and no birds. In an ecosystem this dense, that level of silence typically occurs only when a dominant predator is in the immediate vicinity. Just off the trail, they found a faded backpack covered in dirt. The bag wasn't discarded or dropped. It was sitting perfectly upright, positioned in the center of the frame and facing the trail. It looked less like lost property and more like a deliberate marker. Between the total ecological silence and the backpack positioned to watch the trail, the group had moved beyond the public hiking zone and into a territory that was already being managed. At midnight, the tape records the first contact. This isolated frequency band shows a whistle originating from deep within the trees. Thinking it might be a lost hiker, Luke whistled back, providing a clear audio sample of his own pitch and volume. The response came seconds later. When we overlay these two waveforms, the match is identical. The entity didn't just disappear. It didn't just imitate the sound. It produced a 100% acoustic mirror of Luke's whistle, only from a much closer proximity. By 2:45 a.m., the entity began mirroring speech. When Luke calls out, "Hey," the tape captures an immediate duplicate. The tone and vocal inflection are indistinguishable from the original speaker. This is real-time acoustic playback. The entity isn't using a biological voice to copy them. It is recording their sounds and projecting them into the sound. It is recording them back with total fidelity. These early echoes weren't attempts at communication. By mimicking the group's sounds and recording the delay in their responses, the entity was calibrating its position and testing how the men reacted to their own voices. The recording from the next morning captures the group's confusion. Despite walking in a straight line away from their campsite, the audio logs their shock as they find the same upright backpack in their path again. The mimicry then shifted into full surround sound. The tape recorded the sound. The tape captures the men's voices being projected from multiple directions at once, creating a sense of being encircled by their own duplicates. In full panic, they began to run. The audio picks up the heavy, rhythmic thud of multiple sets of footsteps that perfectly match the tempo of their own breathing and stride. The terrifying chase ended when Luke fell. The recording captures the sound of a hard impact, and Luke's voice rising in panic as he realizes he's injured. While Aaron was standing directly behind the camera, the audio was recorded. Aaron was standing directly next to the narrator. The narrator's phone records Aaron's voice coming from the opposite direction, telling them to stay. The entity used these stolen voices to create a wedge of hesitation. By projecting a highly familiar command from a false location, it successfully separated the group, leaving the injured member behind. Aaron and the narrator made it to the road, but Aaron recovered the phone a week later. It had been recording the entire time. When we filter out the high-frequency sounds of the wind and the men shouting, a hidden sub-layer of audio becomes visible on the timeline. This track contains a fourth voice, a low, distinct frequency, repeating a single word. Learning. Further into the file, the tape captures the narrator's voice, saying, "Come closer." The narrator confirms he never spoke that phrase. The entity had stopped just mirroring sounds and started synthesizing new ones. It had gathered enough vocal data to move past simple repetition. It was now using the narrator's voice to construct its own predatory commands. Search teams found no struggle, no abandoned campsite, and no backpack. Luke was never found. 2 months later, Aaron disappeared from his home without a trace. Now the narrator reports hearing a single sharp whistle directly outside his house at night. It is the same frequency recorded on the organ tape. The entity has the vocal samples it needs. It no longer has to wait for a hiker to enter the woods to start the recording. A seasonal fire lookout job in northern Montana offers the ultimate escape, a world defined by the absence of noise and human contact. The handoff is quick. You meet a ranger at the base of a rusted, decades-old tower and watch him drive back down the mountain. The ranger's briefing leaves little room for questions. You report fires to the radio. If anything else occurs in the wilderness, the only protocol provided is to stay inside the cabin. Your interaction with the outside world is limited to a two-way radio and these binoculars. From the top of the ridge, these lenses are the only way to monitor the miles of timber stretching toward the horizon. On the first night, the forest is swallowed by an absolute heavy blackness. It is in this void that a single light appears. A lantern, moving slowly through the dense tree line far below. In a landscape defined by isolation, a moving lantern breaks the natural order. It is an intentional presence in a place that is supposed to be empty. By the third night, the single light returns to the valley. This time, it is joined by a second lantern, moving in tandem deep within the trees. Their movement lacks the randomness of lost hikers. The lights circle one another and pause to mark specific points, suggesting a coordinated predatory intelligence. During a routine radio check, the dispatcher asks a specific question. You see anything unusual? When you report that all is clear, the line goes dead with a warning to keep it that way. Physical evidence appears at the base of the tower on day 5. Dozens of fresh boot prints circle the metal legs, even though no vehicles have used the narrow access road since your arrival. That night, the sound of heavy footsteps creaks of the metal stays. A voice from outside the door politely asks to be let in, but the tone is entirely flat. It is a human sound produced by something that does not understand emotion. A hidden map found in the cabin drawers reveals the tower's true context. Handwritten red circles surround the ridge, marking Tower 14 as the center. Across the top edge, a previous occupant left a single sentence. They follow the light. The tower's lighting system acts as a beacon for the entities. Every candle power intended for safety serves instead to draw them from the forest floor directly to the ridge. On the 6th night, you plunge the tower into absolute darkness, hoping to hide from whatever is climbing the mountain. The blackout fails. 10 lights erupt from the tree line simultaneously, rushing the base of the tower with a speed no human hiker could maintain. As they reach the stays, the creatures employ mimicry. They overlap their voices to plead for help before switching to a perfect replication of your own voice, demanding that you open the door. The door cracks under the pressure. A long, multi-jointed hand reaches through, blindly searching the cabin interior until you force the door shut. These mimics are hunters seeking a vacancy. By perfecting the voices of the watchmen and attempting to breach the cabin, they demonstrate an intent to physically replace the observers they hunt. At first light on the 7th day, you leave the tower. You head down the mountain without a radio call or a backward glance until you reach the valley floor. One final look toward the ridge reveals a silhouette standing in the cabin window. It is holding a lantern, having successfully assumed the role of the watcher. This overhead diagram maps the panopticon logic of the forest. The tower stands as a central point of light, pulling predator markers out of the wilderness and pinning them to a single fixed coordinate. The Forest Service recruitment for Tower 14 centers on a hidden requirement. They hire youths to maintain a human presence, keeping the entities focused on a single, isolated location. In the deep wilderness, you are never the observer. You are the subject being observed, trapped in a system designed to sacrifice you to the forest. I used to joke about people living in the walls. It was an internet story I'd read late at night. But for almost 2 weeks, a stranger lived inside my house while I had no idea. This happened last year, when I moved into a small house just outside the city. It had been empty for a while. The realtor mentioned the previous owner had moved out suddenly, but they didn't offer any details as to why I didn't push for more information. I was looking for a quiet space of my own. The property was cheap, and that desire for a fresh start made it easy to overlook the gaps in its history. The structure had the usual quirks of an older building. The wooden floorboards creaked under any weight, and the air vents rattled whenever the heat kicked on. It was noisy, but the sounds felt like they belonged to the house. When we seek out peace, our brains engage in environmental normalization. We categorize unfamiliar noises and warning signs as harmless structural flaws to protect our internal sense of safety. That sense of safety lasted until the fourth night. At T2.30 in the morning, I woke up to a house that was entirely still. No wind, no heaters running. Then I heard a faint shifting sound. It was coming directly from the ceiling, right above my bed. To understand the sound, you have to look at the layout of the house. A hidden, enclosed attic space sits right over the master bedroom, and the only access point is a single hatch in the hallway ceiling. Lying there, I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon finding a warm spot, or perhaps just the wood settling as the temperature dropped. I forced the noise back into a category that didn't require action. Facing an unknown threat, the mind's first line of defense is denial. We convince ourselves that a potential danger is merely nature or architecture running its course. But the sounds returned at the same hour every night. Over the next week, the random shifting became footsteps. Slow, measured pacing. The pacing was deliberate. Whatever was up, there was tracking my movements from above. The realization turned my curiosity into a constant, heavy dread. I eventually had to look. The next morning, I grabbed a chair, climbed up to the hallway hatch, and pushed it open. The attic was empty. I saw nothing but thick dust and old, exposed insulation. There were no animal nests and no visible footprints. This is the trap of false relief. When a search turns up nothing, the brain assumes the threat was a hallucination. You stop looking exactly when the danger is most present. I slept well that night, convinced I was alone. But the next morning, I found a kitchen cabinet door left open to a snack box, physically torn. The fridge, noticeably lighter. An attic completely empty. But my kitchen told a different story. I tried to rationalize it as a memory lapse. I went out and bought a basic kitchen security camera that afternoon, ostensibly to prove I was just overthinking things. The following morning, I reviewed the footage. For hours, there was nothing but a static view of the kitchen. That changed at 2:41 a.m. The camera caught the cabinet door opening on its own. Seconds later, a figure drops into the frame, coming straight down from the ceiling. The intruder moved slowly, taking the food. Then, they stopped and stood perfectly still. Eventually, they turned their head toward the dark hallway, staring in the direction of my bedroom. Physical evidence like this ends the period of denial. You are forced to accept that someone else has access to your life, while you are your most exposed. Seeing that footage made me realize how defenseless I had been every night. I left the house and called the police immediately. The officers watched the video and began a room-by-room sweep of the house. They took their flashlights and headed back to the hallway hatch, this time pushing much deeper into the attic. Tucked away in a corner far from the hatch, they found a lived-in nest. There were stolen blankets, discarded food wrappers, and empty bottles. This person had been living there for weeks. This image shows the most disturbing find. Scattered among the blankets were printed photos of me, sitting on the couch, watching TV, and sleeping in my bed. The presence of surveillance photos redefines the intrusion. This was a targeted, intentional campaign of psychological stalking. The police found no signs of forced entry and no fingerprints. They never determined how this person entered the house or how they left it for the final time. I moved out a week later. I left my furniture and my belongings behind, refusing to ever go back inside that house alone. Even now, I think about the previous owner leaving so suddenly and the house sitting empty for months. Since there were no signs of a break-in, I'm left with one question. How long was that person already living in that empty house before I even moved in? The lasting impact of the intrusion is the realization that home is a fragile idea. A locked front door only manages the perimeter. It has no power over what has already crossed the threshold.